A Trip into the Darkness. Chapter 5. The first thing Mallory realized when she started to awaken was that her head was pounding. Had she not drank any water yesterday? Her mouth was so dry and felt like sandpaper. Surely she wasn't hungover. If she was, this might be the worst hangover of her entire life, and she couldn't even remember what she consumed. Perhaps she drank so much that she completely blacked out and was laying in a ditch somewhere. She moaned slightly as she tried to turn her head. That's when a sharp stab of pain shot through her neck and down her arm. Mallory let out a quiet whine, sitting up on the bed with her hand pressed to the side of her neck. "Oh no," she whispered, looking around the dark gray room while remembering her run-in with the devil. How had he caught her? She remembered looking down from her bedroom window, seeing him there in his designer suit leaning against a tree, but she thought she had escaped him when she climbed out of Miss Bradley's window. She remembered thinking that she just needed to make it onto campus, then she could evade him somehow and call an Uber. She figured he wouldn't have been crazy enough to kidnap her when they were surrounded by so many people. But she had never made it to campus. She was in the trees when she felt him grab her and stab her in the neck. How was that possible? How did he figure out she went out the back of the building? Perhaps he had help and it wasn't him who grabbed her, but instead one of his buddies. She remembered his energy as he slammed his hand over her mouth and she shivered. No, it had to have been him that got her. Mallory closed her eyes and focused on trying to pace her racing heart. She had read some pretty messed up books in her life and could only imagine what this sick man wanted to do to her. She hoped he was just a rapist and not some kind of twisted serial killer who planned to cut her skin off her body and try to feed it to her. With that thought, she threw her legs off the bed and ran to the door. It had a fingerprint scanner and a handle that wouldn't twist. She also learned that the door was solid metal as she threw her fists against it, banging. She had not realized she was screaming until her ears started to hurt. Closing her mouth, her throat throbbed, and she tasted blood. Lowering her hands from the door, she realized that that was probably a complete waste of energy. Swaying on her feet, she tried to fight the overwhelming lightheadedness which was ambushing her. She wanted to slide down on the cool tiled floor and lay her head upon it until the room stopped spinning. She didn't know what that prick gave her, but she felt like she had donated 3 liters of blood to the blood bank. After a couple of minutes of leaning against the metal door, she remembered to pat her pockets. Disappointment hit hard when she realized she did not have any of her belongings. He had even taken her apron, which she shouldn't have felt surprised about, but she did. She felt naked without her apron on. The cold seeping in through her heels made her realize that she was also missing her shoes. Not sure why I thought that was an important aspect to remove. Not like I could kill anybody with a shoe, but whatever, she mumbled to herself. It probably had something to do with control, Mallory figured, while she stared at her feet, clad only in mismatched socks. She had a dark purple one, and the other was light blue, on her feet. She remembered in elementary school when mismatched socks were the fad. If you were a girl and didn't have different colored socks with rainbows and cats on them, then you were a loser. She had never been too interested in participating in the trend because spending the time to pick out 2 different socks every day just seemed stupid. Who would waste time on such a meaningless thing? That's when she realized that laundry would be a lot easier if she didn't take the time to match her socks in the first place and just wore whatever came up. Here she was, over 10 years later, still living by the motto of, who has time to match their socks? Hell, she was lucky if she even rolled her socks up and then just shoved them in the basket after they were clean. That made her remember that today was probably Monday and she was supposed to do her laundry on Monday. Dread filled her as she thought about how she didn't have anything clean in her apartment and how her clothes were scattered everywhere. When her brother or the cops went looking for her, they would discover her mess of an apartment and think she was a total slob. She really wasn't a slob, though. She was just so damn busy and didn't have time for mundane things, like picking up after herself. She assumed her brother wouldn't be that surprised when he visited her apartment, though. They had grown up together, and after their mother died, they had lived together for a short time. Lance had loved to yell at her to clean up after herself, and that he was not her personal maid. Of course, she had never thought of him as a maid, and would always get around to cleaning up her messes, eventually, most of the time. That was if he didn't beat her to it just so he could lecture her about being such a lazy person that needed to try harder at being tidy. He was simply a control freak, and was always so anal about keeping the house clean and things in order. When they were growing up, he would constantly follow their mother around like a lost duckling, picking up after her. Their mother had, in fact, been a slob, and was never ashamed of it. The woman couldn't help it, though. She had too many other things clouding her mind to worry about cleaning. Mallory was certain that she had developed that from their mom. For Lance, their mother's scatteredness had the opposite effect. He felt like he had to control and fix everything. He moved out of their mother's apartment when he was 19 because she told him she needed to move again. Lance had informed her that he was sick of moving and wanted to stay in Columbus. He already had a job at a dealership as a salesman and was making lots of money, so he could afford his own place. Thus, he moved out, and Mallory and their mom picked up and moved to Indianapolis. Their mother died 5 years later when Mallory was 17 and Lance 23. With no money of her own and a semester and a half left of high school, she moved back to Columbus and moved in with her brother for a year. It had been one of the longest and hardest years of her life, dealing with the grief of losing their mother to cancer and then having to adjust to an asshole roommate that liked to remind her that he was the boss and she was only a child. She got a job as a waitress when she moved in with him and saved every penny she could so she could move out as soon as she graduated. After graduation, she ended up staying with Lance until the beginning of August because that's when her apartment became available. To say they hated each other when she finally moved across the state to Toledo would be an understatement. She had thought about moving to a different state entirely just to be further away from his overbearing self. However, the University of Toledo offered her a small scholarship for excellent grades, and they had an amazing campus. She had also found the apartment right beside campus, so that she could walk there every day, and the apartment had been in her price range. She eagerly moved into the new apartment, and in no time she got a job working at Marcy's Diner and Pub. Mallory teared up as she thought about the possibility of never seeing her grumpy older brother ever again. They had gotten back on much better terms over the past few years and even spent holidays together. Every time she talked to him, he always had a different girlfriend. During the year they had lived together, she was certain he had 7 committed relationships. Why he didn't just hook up with people and leave them as she did with her guys, she didn't understand. For whatever reason, he liked to string his partners along, only to wait until they were madly in love with them, and then leave them heartbroken. Yep, that was her brother, the asshole. Blinking her eyes, she realized her head had stopped spinning. Taking a deep breath, she allowed herself to take in her surroundings with more detail. If she had to guess, she would say the room was 10 by 20 feet. There was a plush red rug in front of the bed, along with another identical rug in front of the tub. There was no shower curtain or rod over the bathtub. The toilet was stainless steel like the ones in prison. Not that she had ever been to prison, or even jail, but she had seen TV. Next, she saw a couple of red towels beside the tub. Seeing that made her wonder how long she'd be locked in this box. She looked at the bed, which was also red, topped with a single red pillow. Walking over to the chair, which was opposite the bed, she tried to pick it up, only to find it wouldn't budge. It was a solid metal chair and would have made a great weapon if it wasn't stuck to the floor. When she looked under both rugs, she found nothing but white tiles. She flipped the mattress off the metal bed frame and found nothing of use. Pressing her hands into the mattress, she couldn't feel any springs within. It felt like it was only filled with cushions. Reaching out to the dark metal bed frame, she found that it too was somehow stuck to the floor. This sociopath isn't taking any chances, is he? She thought. She ran her hands over the wall and slammed her palms on them every so often. From the sound and feel of it, she was willing to bet that there was concrete behind the drywall. Everywhere she hit her palms against was solid and without an echo. Not that she thought she could dig her way through the walls, but she sure as hell would have tried if she thought they were hollow. When she made it to the wall with the toilet and the tub, she stopped and started to investigate the plumbing for anything loose that she could use as a weapon. She found the toilet was indeed something that would have been in prison because there was nothing that could be used to her advantage. Everything was secure and solid. She tried kicking the thing to see if it would budge, but it was stuck. Damn it, Mallory mumbled as she moved to the tub and the shower next. It was the same as the toilet. Nothing would budge. She tried ripping the shower head off the wall, but it was like someone had welded it on. She turned the knob to see if the thing even worked and felt a moment of happiness as water gushed out of the tub. Cupping her hands under the stream, she brought a couple of handfuls of water to her mouth. Getting her fill, she shut the water back off. No reason to waste it, after all. It wasn't the Earth's fault she was kidnapped by some sociopath. Moving on, she flung the towels around and found only a simple white bar of soap that didn't even have a smell. She really was in a prison. She was locked in here with nothing but her dirty clothes and a shitty bar of soap. This motherfucker didn't even leave her any food. Was it part of his plan to starve her? Would she slowly wither away until she was nothing but a husk of a body? No, Mallory thought, continuing to walk around the room and feel the walls. She would not let her mind wander on what was going to happen to her because the options were limitless, and she could drive herself mad trying to imagine them all. As her stomach rumbled, she couldn't help but think about poor Eddie. He would have realized by now that she was missing. She had never stood him up during the many years of their friendship. She was certain that by 4:45 yesterday, he would have been knocking on her door, yelling her name. Mallory stopped walking to think if it really was Monday or if her sense of time was just that messed up. It felt like she had been asleep for a long time. If he had drugged her, wouldn't it have taken hours for it to wear off? Perhaps it was only a few hours after she ran out of the diner. Was it just now 4 o'clock and Ed was grabbing his hat and keys, waiting for her to knock on his door before barging in like she owned the place? He used to love giving her grief about not having any boundaries. She had no issues walking into his apartment if the door was unlocked. She had always assumed he left it unlocked for her. It's not like Ed ever had a woman over. He had told her multiple times that he was done dating and was fine being alone. He may have been over dating, but she didn't believe him about being alone, because she too was alone, and it was lonely. She knew firsthand how depressing it was to be by yourself all the time. He also used to love to give her hell about the stream of different guys coming in and out of her apartment. He loved to tell her that she should just pick one and try to make it work. She would get very defensive about this topic and ask him how that had worked out for him. She knew it hurt his feelings, but that was one topic that wasn't open for discussion. Mallory felt another wave of tears trying to escape as she thought about what Ed must be feeling while she stood him up. She tried to hold back her sob, but it escaped. Screaming at the top of her lungs, she went back to slamming her fists on the door. A steady stream of profanity left her lips, and she used every cuss word she could think of, along with calling her kidnapper every degrading thing in her lexicon, which was quite advanced considering the amount of time she'd spent reading and studying the English language throughout her life. She had no clue how long she did that, but eventually a wave of drowsiness hit her, and she sunk to the floor with her back against the cold door. Her hands and arms hurt, and her throat felt raw. Looking up at the dark gray ceilings, she noticed 2 cameras, one on each side of the room. Anger shot through her as she realized that bastard was probably watching her right now and using the footage as spank bait. "You sick motherfucker," Mallory rasped. She doubted he could hear her unless he had also installed audio in here. She wouldn't have been surprised if he had. She thought back to some of the romance books she had read over the years where a rich guy would kidnap his crush and she would develop a terrible case of Stockholm Syndrome. Of course, the author said it was love, but Mallory never bought that shit. She found them interesting and sickening at the same time. The idea of stealing her away and taking her freedom had never appealed to her. She had too much going on in her life and too much to do to be taken captive. Yet look at her now. Quizzes she would never get to take, and that fucking paper she had spent so much goddamn time writing, just sitting at home on her computer, waiting to never be turned in. She put her face in her hands and thought of all her hard work going down the drain. Come the beginning of next week, she will be dropped from her master's program. So much for becoming a professor and a best-selling author. In no time, her life would be worthless. A goddamn college dropout. She laughed at that. So much wasted time and wasted effort. She had made herself sick at times trying to keep up and do better, and now none of that mattered. She didn't matter anymore. Mallory stood up and started pacing. She couldn't think like that. It was still early in the game. Perhaps she could figure out a way to escape or kill this bastard. Yes, that was a nice thought. She would keep thinking along those lines to keep her spirit up. She had to try and believe in a positive outcome. At the very least, if she did die in here, she wouldn't have to pay back her assload of student loan debt. That made her laugh again. Fuck the government and its high interest rate loans.